Imagine you're 13 years old. Let's call him Charles. And his doctor is concerned about his health, specifically the risk of type 2 diabetes because he's overweight.
Right. A tough spot for anyone, especially a teenager.
Exactly. He's told he needs to make some pretty big changes. Diet, exercise, the works. But where do you even start with that?
Well, for Charles, his journey kicked off with a dietitian, Daniel. And Daniel didn't just talk about good foods and bad foods.
No.
No, he went deeper.
Uh-huh.
He explained the fundamental chemistry of what we eat and how our bodies actually use it.
Hmm.
All comes down to matter, energy.
Oh.
These core concepts really define our physical health.
Okay. So that's our focus today, then.
Precisely. We're doing a deep dive into foundational chemistry concepts. We're using a key textbook as our guide, Chemistry, an introduction to general organic and biological chemistry, the 13th edition by Timberlake.
Oh, okay.
And our mission, really, is to pull out the most important bits about matter, energy, temperature, and show you just how surprisingly relevant they are. Practical stuff for health and life sciences.
I like that. So how these principles affect everything from the food on our plate to how our body temperature works, even something like you said, an ice pack.
Yep, even an ice pack. It's all connected through chemistry.
Okay, let's dive in. Let's unpack this.
Right.
So let's start right at the beginning. The building blocks matter.
Right.
We kind of know it's anything that has mass and takes up space. Your orange juice, the air we breathe, the device you're listening on. It's all matter.
Absolutely. But the key is how we classify matter. That helps us understand its behavior, particularly in biological systems, like our bodies.
Okay, so how do we classify it?
Well, the first big split is between pure substances and mixtures. Pure substances have a fixed, definite composition. They're consistent through and through.
Like what?
Think elements. They're the simplest type, made of only one kind of atom, like silver or iron or the aluminum in a can, just that one thing.
Oh, okay, elements. Got it.
And then you have compounds, also pure substances. But here you have atoms of two or more different elements chemically combined. And this is crucial. They're combined in fixed proportions.
Fixed proportions, like water, H2O.
Exactly. Always two hydrogens for every one oxygen. But change that just a tiny bit, like to H2O2.
Hydrogen peroxide.
Right. Totally different substance, different properties, even though it's made of the same elements. Those fixed ratios are everything in compounds. And you can only break compounds down into elements using chemical processes, not physical ones like boiling.
Interesting. Okay, so that's pure substances. What about mixtures?
Mixture is different. You've got two or more substances physically mixed together but not chemically bonded, and the proportions can vary. Think about air, mostly nitrogen and oxygen, but the exact amounts can change slightly.
Or like
Right.
steel. Or coffee.
Perfect examples: steel, brass, tea, coffee, ocean water. All mixtures. And unlike compounds, you can separate mixtures using physical methods, like straining your spaghetti from the water.
Makes sense. So within mixtures, there are different types too.
Yep. Two main types, homogeneous and heterogeneous. Homogeneous mixtures or solutions look the same throughout. The composition is uniform, you can't see the separate parts.
Like salt dissolved in water or the air we mentioned.
Exactly. And this gets really relevant in health.
Yeah.
Think about breathing mixtures for divers. Nitrox. It's a homogeneous mix, more oxygen, less nitrogen than air, helps prevent nitrogen narcosis.
Oh, right.
Or heliox, oxygen and helium. It's less dense, easier to breathe. Used for really deep dives, but also in hospitals for people with severe respiratory problems. These uniform mixtures are critical for specific medical uses.
Wow, okay. And heterogeneous.
That's where you can see the different parts. The composition isn't uniform. Think oil and water, they don't mix evenly.
Or a chocolate chip cookie, you see the chips, you see the dough.
Exactly. Or orange juice with pulp. Or a salad dressing with chunks of blue cheese and oil and vinegar. You can clearly distinguish the components.
Okay, that distinction is clear. Pure substances versus mixtures, homogeneous versus heterogeneous. And all this matter exists in different states, right? Solid, liquid, gas.
Precisely. The three physical states, solids, like an ice cube or, say, a bone, have a definite shape and volume. The particles are packed tightly in a rigid structure, just vibrating a little.
Then liquids, like water or blood.
Right, they have a definite volume, but they take the shape of their container. The particles are close, but can move around randomly, allowing them to flow.
And gases, like the air in our lungs.
No definite shape, no definite volume. Particles are far apart, moving super fast, zipping around to fill whatever space they're in. Helium in a balloon, propane in a tank.
Understanding these states is pretty fundamental, isn't it? Helps us predict how things will act.
Absolutely. from how we breathe to how we digest food.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Let's talk about how matter changes. Physical versus chemical changes.
Good transition. Physical properties or characteristics you can observe without changing what the substance is. Shape, color, melting point, boiling point, shininess.
Like copper. We know it's orange-red, solid, shiny, conducts heat and electricity well. Those are physical properties.
Exactly. And a physical change alters the state or appearance, but not the chemical identity. Water boiling, still H2O, just gas instead of liquid.
Or dissolving salt in water. The salt's still salt, the water's still water, they're just mixed.
Right. Cutting paper, hammering gold flat, all physical changes.
Yeah.
You haven't made a new substance.
But chemical changes, that's different.
Totally different. Chemical properties describe a substance's ability to change into something new. Paper can burn. Iron can rust. Milk can sour. That potential is a chemical property.
And a chemical change is when that actually happens.
Yes. The original substance transforms into one or more new substances with new properties. Rusting iron becomes iron oxide. Burning wood becomes ash, CO2, water vapor.
Or like you mentioned earlier, caramelizing sugar for flan. Heating sugar turns it into a new caramel substance.
Precisely. That's a chemical change. The sugar molecules themselves are rearranged.
So knowing the difference is key, especially in cooking, right? Melting chocolate is physical.
Still chocolate.
But browning onions involves chemical changes that create new flavors.
You got it. It's chemistry in action, in the kitchen and inside our bodies, constantly.
Okay, let's bring energy into the picture. This was central to Daniel's advice for Charles, right? The energy of life.
Absolutely fundamental.
Yeah.
Energy is just the ability to do work. We feel it when we're tired. We need food, which provides energy. It powers everything.
And there are two main types, kinetic and potential.
That's right. Kinetic energy is the energy of motion. Running, a ball flying, even molecules vibrating faster when they get hot.
And potential energy.
That's stored energy. Could be stored because of position, like a rock balanced on a cliff, or water behind a dam. Or, crucially for biology, it's stored in chemical bonds.
Like in the food we eat.
Exactly. Food, gasoline, the ATP molecules in our cells, they all store potential energy in their chemical structure. Digestion breaks down food, releasing that potential energy and converting it into kinetic energy for movement, warmth, thinking, everything.
And heat is a specific kind of energy related to particle motion.
Yes. Heat is the energy associated with how fast particles are moving. Faster movement means more heat or higher temperature. Heat flows from hotter things, faster particles, to colder things, slower particles.
Now, units of energy, this can get confusing. Joules, calories.
It can. The official scientific unit is the joule, J. Often we use kilojoules, kJ, which is the 1,000 joules. But the older unit, the calorie cal, is still common. It was originally the heat needed to raise 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius.
But the one on food labels is different, right? The capital C calorie.
Yes. Crucial distinction, and one Daniel would have definitely clarified for Charles. The nutritional calorie, capital C, is actually kilocalorie, kcal.
So 1 calorie equal 1 kilocalorie equals 1,000 of those smaller scientific calories.
Precisely. And 1 scientific calorie is about 4.184 joules. Just for context, a medical defibrillator might deliver a shock of around 360 joules. That's energy doing work directly on the body.
Okay, back to Charles and his diet. Food gives us chemical potential energy.
Right. For growth, repair, movement. Carbs are usually the first fuel source, then fats, then proteins if needed.
And how do they figure out the calories on food labels?
They use a device called a calorimeter. Basically, they burn the food inside it and measure how much heat is released by seeing how much it warms up a surrounding water back.
And different foods have different energy values.
Definitely. This is super important for diet planning. Carbohydrates and proteins both give you about 4 kilocalories per gram. That's 17 kilojoules per gram.
Okay.
But fats, they pack a bigger punch, about 9 kilocalories per gram, or 38 kilojoules per gram. Significantly more energy dense.
Wow, more than double carbs or protein.
Yep, so those numbers are used on nutrition labels. If Charles's crackers had, say, 19 grain carbs, 4G fat, 2G protein, you do the math, 19 by 4 plus 4 by 9 plus 2 by 4, that adds up to 130 kilocalories or 130 nutritional calories.
I see. And Daniel found Charles was eating about 2,500 calories a day, but needed more like 1,800.
Correct. According to AHA guidelines for his age. When energy intake consistently exceeds energy output, the body stores the excess, usually as fat, leading to weight gain. The brain's hunger center tries to regulate this, but, well, it's complex.
So Daniel also pushed exercise to increase energy output.
Exactly. At least 60 minutes a day, because different activities burn different amounts of energy. Sleeping might be 60 kcal/hour, walking 200, swimming 500, running maybe 750. Understanding this helps balance the equation.
Energy in, energy out. It's a chemical balancing act.
It really is.
Okay, let's talk temperature. Also critical for health. Celsius, Fahrenheit, Kelvin.
Right. Celsius and Fahrenheit are common scales. Kelvin is the SI unit, starts at absolute zero, negative 273 degrees C, where theoretically all particle motion stops. Conversions are straightforward formulas, useful in science and medicine.
But the key thing for health is maintaining a really narrow temperature range, isn't it?
Incredibly narrow. Normal human body temp is tightly regulated around 37.0 degrees C or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Deviations can be serious.
Like hyperthermia. Too hot.
Yeah, if body temp gets above 41 degrees C, about 106 degrees here, you risk convulsions, heat stroke, needs immediate cooling, maybe ice baths. Chemistry gives us ways to measure and manage this.
And hypothermia. Too cold.
Also dangerous. Below about 28.5 degrees C, around 83 degrees Arv, you can get irregular heartbeats, lose consciousness, needs careful warming.
And medicine even uses extreme temperatures deliberately.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Dermatologists use liquid nitrogen incredibly cold at -196 degrees C to freeze off skin lesions. That's cryotherapy. On the other end, thermotherapy uses heat, maybe up to 113 degrees 45 degrees C, sometimes to help destroy cancer cells. Precise temperature control is a powerful medical tool.
Fascinating. So how does the body maintain its stable temperature so well? You mentioned water earlier.
Yes. This brings us to specific heat. And water-specific heat is kind of its superpower.
Okay, what is specific heat exactly?
It's the amount of heat needed to raise the temperature of 1 gram of a substance by 1 degree Celsius.
And water's is high.
Remarkably high. 1 calorie per gram per degree Celsius,
Right.
or 4.184 joules per gram per degree Celsius. Much higher than, say, metals or sand.
So what does that mean practically?
It means water can absorb or release a lot of heat without changing its own temperature very much.
Ah, like near the coast. The ocean keeps temperatures more moderate.
Exactly. The water absorbs huge amounts of heat in summer, releases it slowly in winter. And since our bodies are about 70% water,
Our body temperature stays relatively stable, even if the outside temperature changes or we generate heat from exercise.
precisely, water acts like a fantastic thermal buffer, a natural thermostat. It absorbs the heat from metabolic reactions without letting our core temperature spike dangerously. Clinically, this is why cooling a patient during surgery works the blood, mostly water, can lose heat, slowing metabolism and reducing oxygen demand.
That's brilliant. Okay, related to heat, let's talk about changes of state again, but focusing on the energy involved. Melting, freezing, boiling.
Right. These phase changes involve absorbing or releasing heat, but often happen at a constant temperature. Think about ice melting. It stays at 0 degrees C until it's all liquid, even though it's absorbing heat the whole time.
That absorbed heat has a name, right? Heat effusion.
Yes, it's the energy needed to melt 1 gram of a solid at its melting point. For ice, it's 80 calories, or 334 joules per gram. And importantly, the same amount of energy is released when 1 gram of water freezes back into ice.
Okay. And boiling. Liquid to gas.
That requires the heat of vaporization. The energy needed to turn 1 gram of liquid into gas at its boiling point.
Right.
For water at 100 degrees C, this is huge, 540 calories, or 2,260 joules per gram.
Wow. Much more than melting ice.
Way more. And again, the same amount of energy is released when 1 gram of steam condenses back into liquid water. This energy involved in phase changes is sometimes called latent heat or hidden heat because it doesn't change the temperature during the transition.
We can see this on heating terms, right? The flat parts.
Exactly. The diagonal lines show temperature changing within a state: solid warming, liquid warming, gas warming. The flat plateaus show the phase changes melting or boiling, where heat is added but temperature stays constant.
How does this play out in real life, like Charles's ice pack?
Perfect example. The ice pack works in 2 ways. First, the ice melts at 0 degrees C, absorbing that significant heat effusion from his sore arm. Then, the resulting cold water at 0 degrees C warms up towards body temperature, absorbing even more heat because of water's high specific heat.
So it's a double whammy of cooling.
Right. If you have, say, 125 grams of ice, just melting it absorbs a large chunk of energy, about 41.8 kilojoule. Then warming that water up to body temp absorbs another 19.4 kilojoule. Total cooling effect. 61.2 kilojoules absorbed. Quite effective.
That makes sense. What about steam burns? You hear they're worse than hot water burns. Why is that if they're both at 100 degrees C?
That's the heat of vaporization biting you. When steam hits your cooler skin, it first condenses back into liquid water at 100 degrees C. In that process, it releases that massive heat of vaporization, 540 calories per gram.
Ouch. So you get burned by the condensation energy before the hot water even starts cooling down.
Exactly. Let's say you get 25 grams of 100 degrees C steam on your arm. It releases about 56,500 joules just condensing. Then that 25 grams of 100 degrees C water cools, releasing maybe another 7,000 joules as it cools to body temp. Total, over 63,000 joules.
And 25 grams of just hot water at 100 degrees C.
It only releases the heat from cooling down maybe around 7,000 joules. So the steam delivers almost 9 times the thermal energy. That hidden heat release during condensation is what makes steam burns so severe.
Okay, that really clarifies it. Are there other phase changes we use? Sublimation.
Sure, sublimation is solid directly to gas. We use it for freeze-drying food. You freeze the food, then lower the pressure so the ice turns directly into water vapor, removing moisture without a liquid phase. Great for preservation.
And the opposite. Deposition. Gas to solid.
That's what causes freezer burn. Water vapor inside the packaging turns directly into ice crystals on the food's surface, drying it out.
It all comes back to matter, energy, and phase changes.
It really does. And tracking Charles's progress, his food intake, his exercise. Daniel was essentially monitoring these chemical and energy principles in action, seeing how understanding them helps reach real-world health goals.
So quite a journey through basic chemistry today.
Indeed. We've covered a lot, drawing from that Timberlake text, classifying matter, physical versus chemical changes, energy in food, temperature regulation, the special properties of water.
And hopefully we've shown that these aren't just abstract textbook ideas. They're incredibly practical. They explain how our bodies work, how medicine functions, even how an ice pack cools you down.
They really are the tools for understanding health and life sciences at a fundamental level.
Mission accomplished then. We dove deep into the chemistry of matter and energy.
Absolutely. And maybe the final thought for you listening is this. Next time you check a nutrition label, or feel your temperature rise with a fever, or see condensation on a cold glass,
Yeah.
remember you're seeing this intricate dance of matter and energy. These chemical principles aren't just academic, they're literally defining life itself.
So how might understanding these basics change how you think about your own health, your daily choices? Something to ponder.
Definitely something to think about.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.